Hello everyone, this is Renee Besta on behalf of the Breathing Color blog, and I have recently written a three-part series, a guide to digital printing, that compares and contrasts digital C prints, or so-called chromogenic prints, with inkjet pigment prints. And I thought I would do a little video here to help explain some of the points I'm trying to get across in the article. Sometimes it's much easier to visualize than to actually read a lot of dense text. Some people are good with that, and others maybe get turned off by that. Some people actually learn by seeing versus reading. But this is in regards to part two, where we are going to discuss color gamuts between the capabilities basically of a chemical dye or a digital C print, and what a lot of those printers, whether small format mini labs or the larger format machines such as the Lightjet, the Poly, the Lambda, or the Chromera, are capable of rendering, what colors, versus a modern day inkjet pigment printer. Now, this is always a source of contention, and one of the reasons also I would like to demonstrate this in the video and talk about it in the text is because there just is so much misinformation out there on the web. I have personally phoned dozens and dozens of labs, both high-end and just your basic photo lab. And I continue when I ask them, for instance, when it comes to chromogenic prints, what's the coverage basically, or can I take a look or download one of the profiles for soft proofing? And just about all of them state, yes, our profiles cover most of Adobe RGB, and that turns out to actually not be the case. And so really what I want to do in this video is to compare and contrast profiles for the Poly, the Lightjet, the smaller Fuji Frontier mini labs, and those were obtained directly from the lab or the studio's websites. And as you know, they're freely available for customers to download for soft proofing. And then I'm going to superimpose profiles for an Epson and Canon wide format professional inkjet pigment printer. And we'll take a look and see exactly kind of what the facts are. You may quite be surprised. So let's just see here, what are we looking at right now on the screen. First of all, I have open an extremely useful software program that I highly recommend called ColorThink Pro, produced by a company up in Seattle called Chromix. It's useful for many things, but the two things I find it most wonderful for in terms of doing would be to be able to open and analyze ICC profiles. That could be an input profile, monitor profile, or a printer profile. And you can also open an image that you would like to print and take a look at all of the points, and that's kind of right here. What we're looking at on the screen represents those by pixels by colored points, and then by comparing that with various output profiles for a printer, ink, and paper combination, can give you much better idea which might be the best choice versus just doing a simple soft proofing on your screen. So first of all, let me see. Let me try to get, I'm going to head and stop this from spinning here. And there are those of you I know that are quite advanced watching this video. I think most people, though, photographers, are familiar with the lab color model or color space. It's a device-independent 3D color space. And let's just quickly look at what are the components here that we're looking at. And I don't want anybody to sort of get, that's not too scientific, turned off by the video. This is actually going to be very simple. We have the L component for lab, which is the lightness axis, which goes from 0, which is absolute black, to 100, which is pure white. Then we have the two colored axes, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with. The A axis, which is supposed to go from red to green. Doesn't quite look like that on screen, but that's the way it is. And the B axis, which is from blue to yellow. And those are set up in 256 so-called points or increments, just the way that that is. The lab mode was set up initially to sort of conceptualize the colors that the human eye can see, although it does cover the entire spectrum. So this is a great three-dimensional, it's a way to visualize via this three-dimensional plot various, like I said, ICC profiles. The program will also allow you to repair profiles and do a number of other things. So what are we actually looking at right here? Well, let me pull that up first. I'm sure most of you are familiar with so-called printer evaluation images that are used to sort of test the capabilities of a given printer paper ink combination and find out what's going to be in Gamut versus out of Gamut. They're very challenging for a reason. Professionals use them and are very familiar with them. Here is one that we have that was jointly developed. Actually, it was based initially on Bill Atkinson's image here. A lot of you are familiar with Bill Atkinson. He was a master printmaker and photographer, owned a business or a printing business, inkjet printing business called Calypso Imaging, which no longer exists. However, you can see a lot of real world colors here: strawberries, aspen trees, a deep green forest, yellow buttercups here, a deep orange sunset. We have a lot of color patches, gradients here. This really will test the capability of not only your printer, but of course the quality of the output profile, which has a major impact. So using that, the late great Uwe Steinmuller, who was a beta tester for Nikon and Adobe, ran the wonderful website called Digital Outback Photo, sort of with Bill's permission developed one of my favorite here, evaluation images. And as you can see, again, these are real world components that can be hard to render. You know, these wonderful rock formations in the desert southwest. We have a variety of skin tones from children here, and lava rock, other things that are going to be difficult to render. Now again, not all of these, the colors in these evaluation images are meant to be able to be printed by a given printer, but many of them should, and by analyzing the output, it gives you a lot of useful information. So basically right here, all of the colored points that we are looking at here are from the Bill-Uwe hybrid evaluation image. What else do we see here? The black wireframe at the top and the black line on the bottom represent the Adobe RGB color space, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And so what is the colored cube here at the top and this colored line at the bottom? What that is a profile for a Lightjet wide format chromogenic printer output on Fuji Supergloss, Fuji Crystal Archive paper, a super glossy paper here, okay? So as we can see, although, I obtained this particular profile from a custom lab, I'm not going to, for obvious reasons, give names, but I was told, well, our profiles cover almost all of Adobe RGB, which I knew couldn't be, because not even an inkjet pigment printer profile will cover that. But this colored line at the bottom, of course, this is the three-dimensional representation. This would be the two-dimensional on the bottom. So here is Adobe RGB here in the black. This is the Lightjet profile, all right, for Fuji Crystal Archive paper. combination. And again, the colored cube would be for the Lightjet and Adobe RGB here. So we can clearly see that this profile does not cover most of Adobe RGB. And the important point with the evaluation image, and I get into this discussion, I'm on a lot of private printing forums and sometimes go back and forth with people that own labs or print studios. Some people, I mean, the facts are just the facts. I like to just sort of look at the facts. That's why we are taking a look here at ColorThink software. And they will say, well, there is no inkjet pigment printer that has a profile that can go beyond Adobe RGB anyway, so hey, you know, may as well get the wet process print. And this is said over and over and over and over, and you know, it's one thing to say that, but it ends up confusing. Not only is it false, but it confuses a lot of photographers, a lot of my students. You know, I was told this or I was told that. They don't have this type of program to analyze. And of course, you know, I say shame on some of these establishments because, you know, they also do inkjet printing, so how could they not know? Everyone knows that today's modern day inkjet printers can exceed Adobe RGB. In fact, let me just pull something up right here for you. Back in 2004, there was a wonderful white paper published by Adobe called A Color Managed Raw Workflow from Camera to Final Print, written by the late great Bruce Fraser, a world-class color scientist, and wrote a lot of books. Probably some of you have the book Real World Color Management, which he was an author on, in addition to Jeff Sheeway, who's a very well-respected commercial photographer in Chicago, writes a lot of books on printing and processing. He's an alpha and beta tester for Adobe, and you can still download this white paper. Just Google A Color Managed Raw Workflow. However, within that paper, and again, this was back in 2004, there was a graphic that I see used quite a bit that shows here we have the horseshoe shape of visible color. And we've got the three major RGB working color spaces that are plotted here: sRGB, Adobe RGB, and ProPhoto. Now, of course, we know these are simply containers that hold color. They have defined gamma and white point. But what this shows, very importantly here, the 2200, we're talking about the old venerable Epson 2200 stylus photo printer, not a professional printer, just a simple 13-inch printer that came out, gosh, probably was around 2003 or 4. And even more importantly, matte paper. So this is a profile for the 2200 on matte paper, and what do we see here were the arrow points. Even on this ancient so-called Paleozoic printer, there are colors it can render, okay, that fall outside that. And here's the line right here for Adobe RGB. We can clearly see there are some areas where that profile protrudes, okay, and certainly beyond sRGB. So it's actually quite interesting, and since that was a long time ago, we obviously are aware what printers are capable of today. So one of the things I got into a discussion with recently with several people that own businesses that do both inkjet and, let's say, Lightjet or Chromera printing. They said, oh, well, you know, there's nothing in the real world that's really going to exceed Adobe RGB anyway. And, you know, that certainly could be true if you're shooting weddings, sports, special events, or portraiture. But for people doing landscape or, let's say, nature images, for instance, I've seen a lot of macro shots of amazing little critters that are highly colorful. And yes, they could have colors that fall outside Adobe RGB. In fact, Let's just say this again, which has been mentioned many times on the Breathing Color blog in articles and podcast. The only color space that can contain all of the colors that the camera's sensor can capture is ProPhoto RGB. That is why it's recommended. If you're shooting camera raw, you use a ProPhoto RGB workflow throughout, okay, your editing post-processing. So here's a good example. This is an image I took at the Amargosa Opera House. This is located in a small town called Death Valley Junction, just outside Death Valley National Park. The owner has lived there since, I think, gosh, the 1950s or 60s. Her name is Marta Beckett. She's in her 90s at this point. She's a performance artist and also a traditional artist. She hand painted all of these incredible murals on the wall of this opera house. So if you're ever in Death Valley, I suggest you stop by and take a look. But I posted this on a forum and got a lot of flack from people that said, hey, you just, did too much tone mapping, didn't know what you were doing with some HDR software. These are not real. Well, this is simply untrue. And again, I would challenge people to go ahead and Google Amargosa Opera House. And the reason I am, again, showing this is because there are so many colors in this image that fall outside Adobe RGB. And in fact, even what an inkjet printer can print, although many can be reproduced. But again, I don't want via use of a rendering intent to let's just say cut off colors or clip them if they are printable. Here, just to give you a quick example, is an image also of the Opera House by a professional Los Angeles photographer named Mike Carano. I don't think he took quite enough brackets. The walls here are darker, but again, it's a little darker than mine, but you can clearly see the colors are, the same. And this is a very hard to render image. So I would prefer, of course, with an image like this, outputting it on Inkjet. I'd use Inkjet exclusively. I know there are people that prefer chromogenic prints, as we're discussing in the blog post. So let's just take a look here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the evaluation image, and if I had opened my Theater of the Desert image, because it's in ProPhoto and 16-bit, it probably would just about crash ColorThink. So let's do some comparing and contrasting. I'm going to get rid of, well, let's see, I'll go ahead and keep that. Let me go ahead and turn on a couple of profiles here. This here in the purple wireframe and the purple line at the bottom is a profile for the Epson 7900 using Photo Black ink on Ilford Smooth Gloss paper. Now what I tried to do is apples to apples, since most of the profiles I downloaded from Photo Labs making the chromogenic prints were on Fuji Crystal Archive glossy, super glossy paper. I wanted to, obviously show a profile for a glossy inkjet paper. First of all, I have to say I am very grateful to Paul DuPont from Green Leaf Color in Los Angeles for providing these profiles. He's an absolute color guru and makes what I think are the best profiles I have ever seen, and they absolutely swallow up canned profiles from the paper manufacturers. So I want to give a shout out to Paul, and I'll put a link in the article about that. What he has done is provide me here with the profile. Let me see if I can get this spinning here. For the Epson, this is hanging up a little bit here, for the 7900 again. So what can we see? Let's let this spin for a second, and I'll go ahead and stop it here. Again, Adobe RGB in the black and the black wireframe. The purple is Paul's profile for the Epson 7900 inkjet printer. And the colored cube and the colored line at the bottom is the profile for Fuji Crystal Archive glossy paper and a Lightjet. All right, and this is from a custom lab. You can clearly see that the gamut is much larger for the inkjet pigment printer, and then keep in mind the chromogenic printers use dyes, which should give them an advantage. And I wanted to point out in this region here with the deep cyans and magentas, it beats out the inkjet pigment profile, which is common because of the use of dyes. And that will depend on whether you're using a Canon or an Epson, and I'll get to that in a second. But again, to refute what a lot of these labs tell people, you know, you're not going to find a profile or your image. Nothing's going to go beyond Adobe RGB. It's just hogwash. We can see right here Paul's wonderful profile protrudes in this area. Come over to here. There's a little here. It's much, much, much larger. And in fact, let me bring up something here to show you. Here is the gamut volume. Under the profile inspector, another useful tool within ColorThink is that you can double click on, and let me pull the other one up here for the Lightjet, and then pull up Paul's. If you open this inspector, it will give you a lot of useful information, primarily here as I'm circling with the mouse or my tablet, my stylus here, the gamut volume for Paul's profile on the Epson 7900, 939,419. Let's take a look over here at the Lightjet profile we've been looking at. Has a gamut volume of 505,760, practically half. And what you can also see, it will tell you the white point of the paper. It will also tell you the deepest black that profile can render. Now the lowest number, of course, is better because 0, it goes from 0 to 100, 0 being absolute black. And Paul's profile here has a value of 3. This has a value of 7 for the Lightjet. So I'm going to click that off right here. So let's pop off the Lightjet here. And what I'd like to do is kind of go through some other chromogenic printers in comparison. What's considered the cream of the crop machine is the high definition Poly or Polyelettronica. That's an Italian made wet process or chromogenic printer on Fuji Crystal Archive glossy paper. I just pulled that up again. That's the colored cube and the colored line at the bottom. And again, it has an advantage here in the magenta and cyans. But what I would also like to do is Paul's also provided me with a profile for the Canon 6400, also on the Ilford smooth gloss paper. So this is the Canon inkjet, the Epson inkjet provided by Paul DuPont. All right, this is the Poly chromogenic printer on Fuji Crystal Archive paper. So they're all glossy papers. And what's interesting here is you can see the Canon 6400, as I said earlier, they have an advantage in these deeply saturated colors here. So it comes much closer to what the Poly can output in the magenta cyans. However, the Epson has the advantage in this particular area here with the reds, oranges, yellows. And that's just a known fact. It's just the ink formulation of the manufacturers. It's the way that it is. And over here they both obviously protrude outside Adobe RGB. And a little bit over here, the Canon, the Epson. The Epson's a little bit better here. So just wanted to pull up the Canon and show you that it is better in this particular region. So I'll go ahead and click that off here. Well, let's look at the profile inspector for the poly. And again, as we saw with Paul's total gamut volume, 939,000. Here is the cream of the crop chromogenic printer, high definition, 48-bit machine here, 550,000. With a maximum black, it's a little better than the 7 on the Lightjet, comes down to 4, Paul's is 3. That's not what's so important here, but something I've mentioned in the article and also in a podcast that we did last year. One thing that's quite disturbing, as all of you know, it's best practices when printing. Let's just talk about inkjet printing right now. To have a custom profile made for your particular printer and computer, your operating system, your monitor, everything, as opposed to just downloading so-called canned or generic profiles from paper manufacturers. And that's one of the reasons I wanted Paul to send over these profiles. He was so gracious in doing so. I could have just downloaded something from Epson, Canson, Hahnemühle, Breathing Color, anywhere else, but this really makes the point much better. A great thing here for ColorThink, if you click on this tab that says header fields, gives you fantastic information. For instance, when was this profile created? Well, for Paul, this was August 2015. It tells you also the instrument and software used to create that profile. Now, Paul uses a Spectralino, which is no longer manufactured, but the software, Basic Color, which is a German company, is listed here. All right. Now, let's take a look. And I've changed the name of this profile. That's something else you can do, is rename profiles with ColorThink. I don't want anything revealed about which lab or, that I downloaded the profile from. However, let's click header fields. Look right here, creation date. Now, understand, this is the most recent up-to-date profile provided for this lab, and I will say it's on the West Coast. It is a supposed custom lab. I know this lab is very well respected, does inkjet printing and chromogenic printing with the poly, high def. Look at the date, June 2007. Well, I downloaded this just several weeks ago. This is March 2016 right now. That is just unbelievable. So what does that show you? Well, most likely that this custom lab, instead of having a specialist come in and make a custom profile for that poly printer under their environmental conditions, their chemicals, their processing, they went ahead and downloaded it, most likely from Fuji, which is, a very sad state of affairs. Profile creation software, MONS, means Monaco. Many of you that have been doing this for a long time remember the company Monaco, or Monaco Easy Color software, or profiling devices. Now, this was purchased by X-Rite a long time ago, and it's no longer supported, but that just goes to show how old this software is, how old this profile is. 2016, my goodness, this is almost a 10-year-old profile, and you know this machine has been in use for quite some time, perhaps not 9-10 years, but goodness, this is a generic profile. This was not produced by this lab. They didn't have anyone come in, or they didn't send out any targets to be measured. It's just, this is not a good situation. So perhaps if that had not been the case, we would be seeing better results here, because I have to say again, if maybe Paul had made this profile for this custom lab, we might see more gamut here. Nonetheless, the inkjet pigment printer falls not only outside Adobe RGB, but it fares much better. And in fact, I'll just turn off here Adobe RGB, and now we're just looking at the poly profile here, which is the cream of the crop again, and what an Epson inkjet printer can do here, or how much color it can reproduce, or it's capable of. Of course, does this matter? Depends on your image. What is your subject matter? What colors are in your image? Maybe you're just shooting, if you're just out shooting an event, a gathering of family and friends, it's not going to be that challenging. Who cares? It would probably work with sRGB. But when a lab tells me these are as good as inkjet prints, it's just simply not true depending on your subject matter and colors in the image. So I'm going to turn this off. Something else I would really like to show. Let's see if I can pull this up, get rid of that. Right now I have the white wireframe here, and the white or grayish white line at the bottom is sRGB. And what I've done, and what you see in the inner colored cube and the colored line here, I've pulled up a standard Fujifilm Frontier Mini Lab profile, again on Fuji Crystal Archive paper, a glossy paper. And again, these labs claim, well, goodness, and I've written this in the article that's running right now, that I am told by everyone our profiles exceed sRGB. They cover almost all of Adobe RGB. Well, we've already seen that is clearly not the case. All right, here's the Fuji Frontier, the profile for that chromogenic printer using Fuji Crystal Archive glossy paper, and here's sRGB. So that's why ColorThink is such a useful program here. This is just unbelievable. It's even smaller, and I'll just go ahead and take a look. There's some areas here where it protrudes right here in sort of the cyans, but other than that, it's pretty much swallowed up by sRGB. Let's click on Adobe RGB, an even more difficult comparison, completely swallowed up. So, you know, I'm not trying to do this to disparage any labs or businesses, establishments. What's upsetting to me is the misinformation that's put out there, and you know, people rely on these labs' expertise. If they say to you, hey, you can download our profile for soft proofing, and you're opening an image in soft proofing in Lightroom or Photoshop and making edits on your image to get a match as best you can between screen and print using their profile, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, certainly not optimal results. It's misleading. It would be better if you're concerned with full color gamut and you're shooting raw. Now, if you're shooting just JPEGs and sRGB, it's not going to make any difference. That's not what we're discussing here or comparing. And I can pull up a number of others here. So here we have Adobe RGB. Here's another Fuji Frontier profile. I mean, they're quite small. I'll get rid of that. Here's another Lightjet profile. There is a little area here that protrudes beyond Adobe RGB, but again, if I open one of Paul's profiles, it's way huge in comparison, with the exception, again, of these deep, like I said, magentas, cyans, that particular area. In closing, I'm certainly hoping you weren't bored. I know this has gone on for a little bit, but rather than type up all this text and show all these plots and take a look at all of this, it's just easier sometimes to visualize. And let me go ahead. I want to just show one more thing here. When we're looking at the profile inspector, these are Paul's profiles for the 7900 Epson on Ilford Smooth gloss paper. All right, custom profile. This is Paul's. This is a profile for the Canon 6400 on the same paper, Ilford Smooth gloss. Now, as I said, the Canon has advantage in certain colors, the Epson in the other. Gamut volume, at least it's closer. I mean, the Epson has slightly more gamut volume, may or may not matter for you. 874,000 for the Canon, 939,000 for the Epson. But the Canon here can achieve a slightly deeper black. It's a L value of 2 versus 3 over here on the Epson. So I'm just trying to demonstrate here what this software can do, how useful it is. I think it's fabulous, and rather than soft proof, you can open an image as I showed from the beginning with the reference image and try out different profiles or different printer, ink, paper, profile combinations and see what might work best for the image. Gives you a lot more information. And, when you download these profiles that are made available to you on either paper manufacturers' websites or a commercial lab's website, you can pop on in here and look at the creation date and find out the software used to make the profile. And if anyone, I have seen this so often with these labs, I have yet, after downloading, and trust me, I've done about 35 of these, it is absolutely, I mean, I tried thinking I must be getting something askewed here. I absolutely have to be doing something wrong here. This can't possibly be. I just, thought I don't want to seem so biased. So I just kept downloading more and more, going from anywhere that these are available for soft proofing, from a mini lab size up to the Lightjet, the Chromira, the Poly, over and over, thinking someone somewhere at one of these labs still doing wet process, the RA4 type prints must have someone like a Paul or a specialist making some profiles for their lab, yet I found none. And you can tell by this profile inspector, they're generic canned profiles. You can tell by the dates, you can tell by the software used. In fact, you can even see some of them say Dry Creek Photo. And in a podcast I did last summer, we had discussed, see if I can get that moving again. This gets hung up, sorry about that. We did discuss that there is a database online through a company called Dry Creek Photo. They do make custom profiles, but you can search for profiles for your local Costco and download them to softproof against. So it's very easy for so many of these businesses are springing up in action these days that it's very easy for them to just go out, download a Dry Creek profile for a given model of a Fuji Frontier or a Noritsu or whatever the case may be on different Fuji papers. There aren't that many, and use them rather than do the right thing and pay someone to come in like a Scott Martin or a Paul DuPont and say, hey, experts, come in for our machine, our chemistry, our environment, our water system, and make us a nice profile so we can get the best gamut and do the best thing for our customers' images. But it's not the case. Hate to say it. So at any rate, I hope that although this is a little long, that this has been informative and will help you out in making some decisions. I've certainly shown the point that the inkjet pigment printers can reproduce colors beyond Adobe RGB, and again, we know that only by using a Pro Photo RGB workflow can you capture, or can that contain all the colors the camera sensor can capture. So I hope that's useful, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave a comment through Discus at the bottom of the Breathing Color blog. And thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.